Welcome to the Great Coaches Podcast.
To me, being perfect is not about that scoreboard out there.
This is a chance of a lifetime.
When you can understand the person, you can then work towards a common goal.
We are all on the same team.
Know your role and do it to the best of your ability.
Focus on the fundamentals. We've gone over time and time again.
Your defense has got to be better.
Leave no doubt tonight.
Great moments are born from great opportunity.
Hello and welcome to the Great Coaches Podcast, where we believe that there is no algorithm for leadership, and so we interview great sports coaches from around the world to try and find ideas to help all of us be better leaders. Our great coach on this episode is Jess Thirlby. Jess is a former England netballer and now coach. As a player, she represented England in youth teams all the way to the senior team. She began coaching England national youth teams while still a player and then retired at the age of 26 to take up coaching full time. She went on to lead Bath to 3 Super League titles and in 2019 was appointed England head coach. And just before we go to the interview, today's podcast is brought to you by the Macquarie University Business School's MBA program. Designed to empower, challenge and transform, the Macquarie MBA gives you the business skills and knowledge you need to succeed in an evolving global economy. The program bridges the gap between theory and real-world application, bringing together world-leading professors, executives and industry partners to teach you how business can be used for good. I have just started working with the team at Macquarie on some projects and can attest to the quality of the people and material. To find out more, search for Macquarie University Business School's MBA. And now, please enjoy our interview with Jess Thirlby.
You're listening to the Great Coaches Podcast.
Jess Thirlby, good morning to you over there. Well, I won't say where you are. And welcome to the Great Coaches Podcast.
Oh, good morning. I'm so privileged that you've invited me on. Like it's one of my faves on my podcast list when I'm driving the lengths and depths of the UK. So yeah, thank you so much to invite me on.
Jess, tell us, where are you in the world and what have you been up to so far today?
I am sat in Loughborough. So Loughborough is kind of home for us as a Roses programme. And we're midway through a 5-day camp just prior to linking up next week for our series against South Africa. So yeah, big day ahead of training and meetings and player one-to-ones and staff meetings. So this is a nice way to start the day. So I'm grateful for that.
Jess, we should talk about it really quickly then, because you're coming up, you're versing, if that's the right word, your mentor, Norma Plummer, in just a couple of weeks. And by the time this goes to air, the results will be in. So I can't wait to see what happens.
I know. Let's hope. Yeah, she'll be definitely gunning to take our scalp. I know that, having known Norma a little while now, and yeah, I absolutely love Norma and everything that she stands for. So it'll be a weird way for us to reconnect. But yeah, it'll be brilliant to have her over on our shores. And yeah, as you say, when this goes out, let's hope I'm still smiling as I am now.
Well, Jess, let's talk about some of the great coaches that you've worked with. Lynn Gunson, who gets talked a lot about, people mention her name a lot when it comes to netball. I'm trying to get her on the show. There's Norma Plummer, Anna Mays and Jan Crabtree. I mean, there's 4 big names of netball right there. And some of your contemporaries have gone on to be great coaches too, like Tamsin Greenway. But I'm wondering, from this experience, working with these legendary coaches up close, what do you think the great ones do differently that sets them apart?
Yeah, I mean, it's such a great question. And like thinking about that through both the lens as a performer. So obviously Lynn was my coach and as was Jan. And then really my workings with both Norma and Anna are very different. You know, they're almost colleagues, and we've obviously co-coached, myself and Anna. So I guess there's 2 ways of looking at it really to try and answer that question. Like through the lens of a player, I remember Lynn by far has had the biggest impact on me, both as a player and a coach. And a lot of that really was done without me realizing. Like I think for most probably the first 10 years of being fortunate enough to work with Lynn, I think it was this kind of implicit ability for her to kind of focus our minds and attention as performers in areas that we most probably had never really looked at in the same way. So I often I'm not very good at articulating it, but those first few kind of sessions that I had with Lynn when she came over to Team Bath, if you were watching from a balcony, you would just see it as a relatively straightforward, simple netball session doing relatively simple looking things. And at the time I'd been in kind of England age groups, and I've always been a very open book, a massive sponge when it comes to learning. So I was really enjoying kind of a new perspective at that point in my playing career. And I used to get on the train on the way home and I used to write everything down that we'd done. Like, that's just me. I mean, I've got thousands of notebooks now I'm coaching. So yeah, I think it was just her ability to kind of take something that felt so normal and make it feel so groundbreaking. And I think there's just it's very skillful. I think from a coaching perspective and a receiver of that type of coaching, it was just where she was focusing my mind. And it was like uncovering a whole new area to your game. And yet you were doing what felt like very familiar, similar things. And so, yeah, being the receiver of that, I found that I was really curious around, well, how is she making me feel like that? And most probably for the years thereafter, not knowing where my journey was going to head in terms of becoming a coach, that led to just a curiosity. So I think my appreciation for the coaches I had was fundamentally instilling in me a curiosity to learn and to gain knowledge, and to almost be, and I'll speak to this most probably in terms of my coaching, but to be made to feel like anything was possible, and actually that the potential that we all have is far greater than we will ever give ourselves credit for. And it's okay, and give yourself permission to just explore that. So I really enjoyed, being coached by the likes of Lynn. And I think then when I think of it through the lens of a coach now, and people that I've worked either alongside or, as you say, invited to become kind of part of my psychologically safe community of experts, really, I guess, in terms of Norma, is just around like the firmness, but the fairness. You know, I think obviously people like Lynn and Norma are so experienced that they can speak from a place of real confidence and knowledge, and it's evidence-based. And, you know, I will never have as much of that because they're always going to be decades ahead. And I think, but both of them really are very firm but fair, but also help that they're brilliant at helping you to both see the learning in it, but also the care and attention that they pay. And I think, you know, that's clearly going to have had a big influence on how I like to think I go about my interactions within the environments that I'm now leading. You know, like you have to be firm in this world of high performance, but that the way in which you do it means everything. And I think you can still be full of care and make somebody feel important, even in those toughest of moments when, as we all know, we have to deal with sharing information or selection or, you know, just telling home truths. And that's not always comfortable, but it's much needed and it's a necessity. So yeah, I think for me, it's the humility of people with such great knowledge, understanding, and their willingness to actually share it. I think the great coaches are brilliant because they want others to learn from their learnings. And so even when it's been outside of my own sport, Brian Ashton, who's obviously coached England rugby, he's another mentor of mine. They're so willing to share and impart their knowledge. And I don't think everyone does that, but it definitely, for me, separates the great from the good. And I'm certainly a product of people like that being so kind with their knowledge. And yeah, that's kind of my experience through two slightly different lenses, I guess.
Well, you have this great experience and then you promptly retire at 26 and become a coach. And your first time as a head coach was with the Celtic Dragons. When you took them over, they were bottom of the league. And I imagine the morale around the place was not so great. But I'm wondering if you can cast your mind back, because of course it wasn't that long ago. What do you remember finding most challenging from that experience?
Yeah, I mean, there's most probably a few things to share with you. One, morale actually wasn't low because I am truly grateful for opportunities like that. So I was transitioning. I'd started my coaching journey even when I was playing. So from like 19 or 20 under the kind of tutelage of Lynn, really, and as part of my journey through the UK Sport Programme, I was already curious. So I was doing what I would now call quite transactional coaching. I would do as much as I could as well as playing at the highest level. And as I kind of made that decision of, do you know what, I am going to call it time on playing, because I'd been fortunate to play for England through all the age groups and right through to the Commonwealth Games in Manchester and a few years thereafter. And I think I'd maxed my potential, and I needed to kind of accept that I can keep going. And I was a good trainer. I did everything I was told. And I just thought that it's got me where I've got to. And I'm just not sure I'm going to get any further. So why don't I just give coaching everything I've got and see whether or not, what that's got in store for me, if I give it the same effort and intensity and commitment. And so to get that call quite early on, I kind of assisted with Team Bath first, and then got a call from the performance director from Welsh Netball, who would have noticed, I guess, that I was clearly looking for a career in coaching and opportunity. So firstly, I'm incredibly grateful, because I think that was a big leap of faith from them. As we all know, just because you've played doesn't make you a great coach. There's no guarantees of that. So I think that was a really big leap of faith of them in me. And so I think the most challenging bit in lots of ways was around the expectation and pressure that I put on myself to kind of make sure I felt a duty to help that club to become better, and for me to have an impact in as quick a possible time as I could. Now, I learned most probably too late after the first 5-6 years of coaching. I was always in a rush, and I don't know where that came from, but I think in my effort and want to have impact on behalf of others that I was working with, I was always in a rush. If it wasn't immediate, and maybe that's a bit societal now as well, but if it wasn't immediate, I didn't feel like I was doing a good job. And so I think it was the pressure really came from me, because I think because of the state of play for that club at the time, they made me feel incredibly welcome. And they showed a lot of trust and faith in me, actually, which really could have only been based on my playing experience at that point, because in all honesty, I had coached, and I'd coached other national teams, and I'd done a great job at Team Bath with, the university side, but these weren't high level yet. So I kind of felt like I owed it to them to return that as best I could by doing the best job I could. The reality was my scope of knowledge as to the how to coach was most probably still very limited. And I do feel sorry for any players and teams that I coached in those first few years, because I felt like in my efforts, I just shared everything I knew, but most probably was lacking a little bit of the how to impart that in a really effective way. So yeah, they would have been the receivers of tons of information. This is what I think, this is what I saw, this is what I experienced. So most probably were very patient with me. And I'm also I consider myself quite a creative thinker. So they would have been on the receiving end of all sorts of what I would like to call innovative ideas, but most probably were just a bit messy, to be honest. So it was a great experience for me to kind of start to explore in action at the coalface, because Super League's not easy. And as you say, to be with a team where they have yet to experience what winning is like. My sole purpose was I wanted to find a way for them to believe that they were capable, and to help get some evidence of that. And yes, that, results do matter. And the fact that we got a couple of wins that year and we didn't finish bottom of the league, even in that first year, for me is a massive win. I think that's a success. And whilst I was only there for one season, to leave them having started that journey, I think is something that I hold really dearly. And I hope it, in some small way, I just helped to mobilize that team and that club to understand that they are capable, that they do belong, and actually to obviously just keep dreaming and having big ambition moving forward. And they are still here. And, they have an Aussie now in Jill McIntosh, who's just taken them on. So when you think about big ambition, yes, time has passed, but I think, yeah, I absolutely loved it. I felt a duty to them. I'm grateful for the belief and trust that they had in me, for taking a bit of a leap of faith in me, and for kind of, being tolerant of most probably a lot of scattergunning in my early days of coaching. But yeah, it was a great experience. And I'm very grateful. My other legacy actually was leaving them with, rather than these, I'm not trying to be horrible, but the kit they had when I arrived wasn't the best. So I left them with a very proud green kit. to represent the Welsh Dragon, and that's a legacy in itself. So I'm as proud of that as I am a few wins.
You're getting there too early. I'm going to come to the legacy question at the end, so you've still got it ahead of you. But I want to ask you, because from there you get into, I think you were in the first batch of people that went through the UK elite sport coaching program, and I'm wondering, I've heard such wonderful things about this program. I'm wondering how it shaped you and just pushed you further along as a coach.
Yeah, I mean, I 100% can confirm what a brilliant experience for me. It was all about timing, I think, for me. So, firstly, for my governing body to nominate me for such a program was a strong indicator in the belief that they maybe had in my potential in coaching. Now that means a lot to me. And again, I wanted to represent the sport as best I could. So I've always had this kind of duty and responsibility that I feel in representing both the game and obviously the Roses. And I think so I got nominated, and it was such a rigorous selection process to go through. And I'm not going to lie, I would have been like a rabbit in headlights through that whole selection process, because I hadn't really yet been coaching full time. So I was kind of it was a bit I was uncertain really as to what this was, but just went for it anyway. Like, I'm a big believer for that. You're never going to feel fully ready, so just have a go and let somebody else make the decision. And found myself on this cohort, as you say. I think it was the second year of this program, and it was a 3-year program designed really to accelerate people that showed potential for roles in high performance sport. That could be performance directorship, it could be head coaches. And found myself in a room, like week-long residentials with 9 other fantastic people. And at that point, definitely having big imposter syndrome around, why am I sat in this room? Because I looked around the table with the likes of Danny Kerry and Tony Minicello and, all of these coaches who had already proven their worth in the field of coaching. They were already successful in their own right, had led teams and individuals to Olympic success. And I think the exposure to both the formal, but I would say the informal learning environment. So a really skillfully designed program where actually the space between the formal presentations, the facilitators that came in, it was the time between that I actually will always treasure and very much try to create now with either the staff or player groups that I'm working with, getting that balance between formal and informal learning. To sit around dinner tables chewing the fat and just listening, the storytelling of so many others and I didn't feel like I had anything to offer them. In the years through the program and thereafter, I would be told differently. And I guess sometimes when you're a bit new and a bit naive to something, you can think a bit differently as well. So hopefully I offered a bit of, different type of thinking and questions, and my curiosity played out. So I think exposure to other people on a similar journey in terms of the level, but not necessarily similar in terms of the knowledge and understanding that we had of coaching and our role as coaches, to be fully supported by UK sport. And what I mean by that isn't just a financial, but, to have people that guided you and signposted you to either people, places, environments outside of sport. Most of those weeks were spent interacting with people from business, from other sports, from healthcare, from music. It was just the most incredible experience at exactly the right time for me in my coaching journey. And also even just chronologically, I was young enough to almost just be a student all over again. And it was just brilliant. And you asked me at the start, what sets the great from the good, and the kindness and willingness of people to share sometimes what were really personal stories and experiences of their coaching, I think then gives almost me permission now to make sure that I'm doing the same. And that degree of vulnerability, as I know is quite topical over the last decade or so, is okay. It's actually needed. And I think because it was so intimate and it was so safe, I really appreciated people being so willing to share the ups and the downs actually of coaching. And I guess because it was so new for me, it prepared me well, most probably, to understand where some of those potential speed bumps would come. And that doesn't mean I've got it right. It doesn't mean it's perfect. You have to experience it to really learn yourself. But yeah, it was a fantastic opportunity, let alone the kind of knowledge and expertise that we learned from outside of sport, and the connections that you then keep hold of and invest in thereafter. So yeah, it hugely shaped me. And I feel like whenever I've set programs up or environments, or when we talk about communities of learning, very much I will still to this day reference back to what I believe worked well in that experience and what of that serves me and others well to this current day. So yeah, again, hugely grateful for that.
So you have that experience, you come back to Team Bath, 3 Super League titles follow. We'll just jump over how wonderful that is, because I want to get to the England job. And what I find fascinating is you came in after this golden period. You know, it must have been, well, I don't know what it was. I want to ask you about it. What was it like coming into that experience? The team had won the gold at the Commonwealth and silver at the World Cup. And I'm wondering now, as you reflect on the way you managed yourself through that transition, what advice do you give to others when they're transitioning into new teams?
Yeah, I think it was such a surreal period, actually, because if you'd allow me to just go back before I come forward, I'd been at Bath for almost 20 years as a player, and then obviously as a coach, pretty much half and half. And during that time, I'd also coached within the England programs through the kind of pathways and with the national team in certain technical roles. And I'd made a decision actually in the previous autumn, so 2018, that I would step away from that role. I'd kind of felt like I'd given all of myself for 20 years. And yeah, it just felt like the right time. And that was a really big decision to make, because obviously it's a place it meant a lot to me. I'd obviously wanted to continue the legacy that Lynn had left and elevate that and make sure that, you know, Team Bath would live long into the netball future here. And it was a big decision. So I didn't actually make that decision with a view of where and what I would do next. And I wasn't looking in the employment pages trying to search what that would be. I knew I loved coaching, like 100%. I knew I loved coaching, but it was such a big decision. It felt right to give it some time and space, and for me to also give myself a little bit of decompression coming out of something and in an environment that I'd done for so long. So many people don't believe that because of the way it then played out. They think I had some grand plan, and unfortunately, I'm not very good with grand plans for myself. I'm good with plans for the team, but it's not something. I'm not particularly ego driven in that way, and some people will say stupid. I think I genuinely needed that time and space. I wanted to really think quite clearly around what next and get excited about that. So I kind of left in the May or June, and you know, I'd bought my tickets for the World Cup like any other fan, and I was taking the family up to watch those games. And I guess not long after, thinking I was, you know, now living off the breadline for a little bit, and my poor husband had kind of told me how long we most probably had before I would have to sort myself out. And within a few weeks, really, of the Super League season ending, I found out along with the rest of the world, and was equally surprised when I heard that Tracy wasn't going to be continuing in the role. I think I was doing the school run, you know, and other people were messaging me saying, "Oh, have you seen the news? Tracy's stepping down." And again, people don't believe that. They think I knew, and I genuinely didn't know. And whilst others were kind of putting 2 and 2 together, and, you know, I guess close friends and colleagues would be like, "Oh, are you going to go for it?" It wasn't even on my radar. Like, it just genuinely wasn't on my radar. One, because I had just assumed Tracy would be in that role for longer, given, as you say, the success. And I know how much she loved that job. And yeah, I just hadn't associated myself with it. And I'd only really just started the first few weeks of school run and not having to coach every day, and was just trying to navigate that space. So yeah, I had a few kind of nudges and prompts from close friends and colleagues, and I had a conversation with Sarah Simonton, who was the performance director, who really was just, I assume I was one of many, you know, scoping out, is it something that I would consider? And I had to sit with that really for a little bit, because it was just so out of kilter with where I'd like the rhythm that I think I was about to head into. So I spoke to people like Brian, and I needed a bit of help really, because my brain, I was been a bit of brain fog. And actually it was brilliant, because during those conversations, I remember Brian, who's a northerner, and very much, as I said before, it actually shares some similar characteristics with Norma, like just cut to the crap and just say, he's like, why wouldn't you go for it? Everything you've done up until this point has prepared you to do this role and do it really well. Why wouldn't you? And it was really in that, I've never forgotten that. And he's abrupt, but he's really caring. And I just thought, yeah, he's right. Like, I haven't done those things to do the job, because it's one role, right? It's either right place, right time. Sometimes your face doesn't fit. If you strive for that, you're going to feel like you failed your whole life. So that wasn't really my driver. But when he said that, it just cleared the fog. And I thought, yeah, I've always gone for things if I feel and care passionately about the team or the direction of travel. Why wouldn't I go for it? And if I'm not right, somebody will right now, somebody will let me know. But why wouldn't I just do it? And I didn't want to have any regrets really. So I guess I quite quickly turned my mindset around to, right, I'm just going to give it my best shot, and we'll see how we go. And, when I did think about the experiences I'd gathered over a period of time, I was actually quite well prepared. I love the England team. I love the Roses. I feel passionately about the untapped potential that we have still to try and uncover more and sustained success on the global stage. So I think that's why I've always had so many different roles within the program, because I care about it. I care about the system being better. I think the players have huge capacity that we've just not found a way to harness consistently. And so, yeah, I made that transition. It was ironic. I'm watching in the stands with my children in Liverpool at that point, and everyone, not everyone, that's a bit of an exaggeration. People would stop me and like the rumor mill was going, oh, are you going to be the next England coach? And at that point, I had no idea of the outcome of interviews. So I was genuinely there not knowing what the future held. So it was a really surreal moment. And then, yeah, I got the call not long after the World Cup, and from August 2019, I'd only finished with Super League in May or June. I thought I was, I don't know what I thought I was going to have to do until kind of Christmas, but found myself in this incredible role, which was just brilliant, really. And I haven't looked back since. And I'd like to think I've thrown everything at trying to help, springboard off of that success. Because as you say, I'm not convinced how many people would have really wanted the gig then. I'm not going to lie, because I think that there would have definitely been some people that they would have liked the idea of the job, and then the realities, as you say, of the landscape at the time, I'm not sure if everybody went for it, because I think the pressure of expectation that then, because we'd been in one final and won one gold, which was brilliant, wouldn't change it, the best thing that could happen for the game and for us. But because of that, as you'll understand, and in particular, I think sport in England and in the UK, you win one, everyone expects you to win them forever. And, it's just apparently, there's just meant to be a pipeline of gold medals from there on in. So I think that kind of weight of expectation is, I guess it's some people are up for that. And so I'm not sure if some people would have been. They would most probably just like to pass that off and, potentially see if somebody else wants to kind of pick that up. And if it doesn't work out, maybe then they'll come in after. And I just thought you can't think like that. You can't disrespect an England coaching role. If you want to do it and you believe you can make a difference and you believe the team are capable, you've got to give it your best shot. And if I didn't go for it then, I may not ever get that opportunity again. So for me, it was just something to not let pass by at all. And so I was happy to take that on. I think I noticed in myself that there's no such thing in my world as a too hard basket. There's just no such thing. I find it very difficult if I'm working in environments where, the climate and the culture is very much like, oh, it's a bit hard. I just don't see a too hard basket. So for me, it was like, I'm going to grab it. I'm going to give it my best shot. That's all I can do, and hope that it will make a big difference over time. So yeah, it's been interesting, and I definitely, as much as it would have been hard to manage the expectation, it was also something to be embraced and celebrated, because I've played in England teams where we're not expected to win. In fact, I've played in England teams for a long time and watched England teams where they walk onto court against an Australia, New Zealand, and you already know the result of the game. It's just by how many are we going to lose? And that's not okay. So I think the fact that we'd had some success on a global stage, and as you say, picking up the bronze in Liverpool at the, to have that home World Cup so soon after winning the gold. I mean, just the tangible, to be in arenas where you could feel, see and hear the difference that gold medal had made was brilliant, really. And I know the team were disappointed to get a bronze in Liverpool because of that expectation. So that kind of was a good scene set for me. Expectation of ourselves is high, that's okay. And expectations of others on us is going to be high, and that's also okay. And actually, we can't have it both ways. Like when you're trying to break into the top 2 in the world and you want to place around that table, you then can't shy away from the expectation that you and others have of the team. You've got to find a way to keep going forward and not avoid it. So I was up for that. I'm up for that challenge. I'm still up for that challenge. I think we're making, our trajectory is going in the right direction. And I think the global game is exactly where it needs to be headed, really, like more competition, margins are smaller than ever. It's unrecognizable really to a decade or so ago. And hopefully really healthy for the game, because I'm sure Australia, New Zealand don't want that. I'm sure they want to keep winning and dominate. But for the game, it's the right thing. And we're going to be on the losing end and the winning side of that. But if that means, the top 5, 6, 7, 8 are getting stronger, then I do think as a product that is much needed for the sport. So yeah, big transition, completely unexpected in terms of timing. I think when you talk about, obviously coming in at such a successful time, yes, and I think that team in 2018, I've been fortunate enough to work with a big proportion of those as under 21 athletes in the England setup and Cook Island World Cup, World Youth Cup. And they were really ripe for success. I was so pleased for that generation of players to actually make their mark, because it had been kind of 10 years in the making, really. But the system underneath that and the lack of depth underneath that particular group was scary, really. So the expectation was so high that we would just keep getting golds, but it was against the backdrop of a system and a lack of depth, really, that were worlds apart. So that was my biggest challenge coming in, is I knew that. I had that guilty knowledge. You don't want to dampen the fan base from the very thing they've waited a whole lifetime to be able to get behind. But it is still and will take huge amounts of work. And we've definitely made a shift, definitely got more depth of talent now. But we've got some way to go, because our opposition have strengths and structures and systems that we don't quite have, and we have different strengths. And we're in some ways batting way above the resource and the systems that we have currently, and are still able to, compete better year on year. So we just need to, just keep being pretty creative with how we do that, and be very proud, actually, of the work that's gone on, not just the last 4 or 5 years, but the last decade or so. I think, we are starting to turn the tide a little bit.
Jess, I'd like to ask a question about your style. And before I do that, I'd like to play back a quote from you. You say, working with such a diverse group feels natural and right, but will come with its challenges. We all think a bit differently, but I invite being challenged and don't want yes people that just agree with what I say. And I can see you nodding along as I say it. It's the challenge part that caught my eye. And what I wanted to ask you, there'll be people listening that think, I wish I could get my team to challenge me more. What am I doing? What can I do differently to get more of that when I go to work, in my team, my community group, wherever it is? And I'm curious to hear what you would say to those people. Where would you start if you wanted to be more challenged?
I think you have to set up an environment and lead and demonstrate that yourself. I think when we hear the word challenge, I think it's sometimes, I think for many people that's seen as a negative word, and I think it's something that people are fearful of. And I think that's just something that we've most probably inherited over time. Again, not necessarily sports specific, but just generally in society. And I'm a big believer that I think challenge is really healthy. It's actually necessary. I think maybe where some of us trip up is in the setting up of an environment and the timing of it and the way in which we challenge, and understanding and being sensitive to the when and the why we're doing it. And I think if you can set a culture of learning up in your environment, then challenge is part of that. That's just the reality. It goes hand in hand with celebrating strengths. You also have to be able to be challenged in order to learn and grow. And I think if you can set it up and frame it in that way, and then be more skillful around the interactions piece, and that being psychologically safe to both give and receive feedback and challenge, and know it's coming from a really good place with good intent, then for me, it has to just come back to seeing that as an opportunity to learn. And we don't always get that right. We're complex humans, and when you're in a team environment, you might think that you've really thought a difficult conversation through, or you've got some feedback that you're unsure as to how that's going to land. I'll always try to ask permission. I'll often say, are you ready to receive, or is it okay if I share some observations? I think just asking that in any team environment and any environment really is so important, because we never know, do we, what's going on for somebody else. We don't know, how something's going to land. We don't know if something's happened at home, and, this piece of feedback is just going to tip people over the edge. And on a different day, at a different time, they'd be much more open. So I think you have to just take a long, hard look at how you're setting up your environment, really. And am I showing those behaviors and characteristics that I hope that I want from others? Because sometimes I can catch myself in that in coaching and leadership. But, sometimes when you make space to reflect on your own behaviors, it's like, actually, that's a mirror of me. Like that. Often with teams, they are a mirror of your energy. They are a mirror of your mindset. And I think being really aware of that is massively important in any type of leadership and coaching role. And often the things that might start to feel unhelpful in a space, the first thing I will do is just reflect back on myself. What was my role in that? Is there anything that I've done that might have been encouraging that? And sometimes it's inaction that might be causing that as well. So I think challenge is a necessity. How it's done needs to be thought through and skillful. And I think asking permission of others, if they're ready to receive it, I think is I've always learned is a really great way to start a conversation. And often it means that that's done with care, but it also means that feedback does need to take place if we're to get better. And again, that's the bit I'm saying. If this is all based on fundamentally connecting us back to our ambition as a team, then you and I should be okay to hear it. Depersonalizing it, I think, is really important. And also allowing each other a bit of time to decompress and sit with some challenge. You don't have to necessarily come straight back to that. I think I've definitely fallen short of appearing maybe defensive at times when I receive it, because I care so much about something, or because maybe I'm feeling a little bit threatened by I haven't done a good job. But I have to just take the personalization bit out of it, and I just have to listen, really listen, and hear what it is that somebody's trying to share with me, and trust that person's actually fundamentally trying to help me. It's in some ways very similar to conversations you have with athletes on feedback. You may not hear what you want to hear, but you're hearing what somebody believes you need to hear in order to move forward and get better. And sometimes I just think I've thought much more about the lead in and lead out of conversations that may feel tricky, where we're going to share some feedback that means it hasn't been perfect, but this is what we're trying to get to better, and allowing time in and out, and others allowing me some time as well, like sharing some feedback and then sitting with it for a little bit, and then setting up an environment where you've made time because I think sometimes in our environments, everything's so fast paced, isn't it? And I think sometimes you skim across stuff, or you don't make time for the things that are actually going to make the biggest difference. So I would I would encourage it. I would make sure that we listen, trust that it's coming from a good place, be curious about the learning that's most probably in there when you feel challenged. And where possible, just try to depersonalize it and recognize, just be quite self-aware how you reacting and responding to challenge. Is that about what's been said, or is it just about something you need to work on a little bit around your ability to receive it? But yeah, just don't be fearful of it. I genuinely do. And I did say that in that quote around it will be hard. Like if you intentionally invite people into the room or into your team, knowing that they think differently, behave differently to you, some of which makes you feel a bit uncomfortable because it's just not who I am, but it's who they are. But that's the whole point, isn't it? One of the things I've always valued from my times in Team Bath is the fact that we called ourselves a bunch of misfits when Lynn first came over, because in every sense of the word, our netballing journey, we were all over the place. Some of us been in an England programme, out of it, never been in it. We just got picked and dropped in this amazing environment. Somebody made us really believe in ourselves. And then out of that, you mentioned Tamsin. I mean, there's so many examples of that environment who have gone on to continue to contribute back to the sport. So yeah, I just think you can't have your cake and eat it. Do you know what I mean? You're going to invite different people in the room. You've got to be prepared to listen, and you've got to be prepared to learn something different from them. And there's no point me surrounding myself with people who think like me, that just means it's a homogenous environment. And if I believe myself to be innovative and creative, my own thoughts aren't going to be innovative and creative enough. So I need to bounce off other people. I've always enjoyed that. And so, yeah, I would embrace challenge, but be skillful with it and remember the human side of the environment that you're setting up so that people feel safe to do that, really.
Jess, as you've matured as a leader, how have you learned to work more with your instincts?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think one thing I've learned about myself 100% is that if I go back to the too hard basket and how I know I even physiologically respond if somebody says we can't do something, I've learned that if I push back on that or I can't let something go, I've learned to really trust that. Because there's a deep feeling in me that says it's worth pushing for that, what I try to do is, one, I think I'm pretty good at recognizing that now. So if I feel strongly about something, if I find myself in a meeting or with the team, like really kind of trying to share passionately something, I know it belongs somewhere. So what I try to do to help others around me understand where that's coming from is to link it back and make the connection. So why does Jess feel so strongly about this? Or why are we doing that? Everything I do, I try to make connections on behalf of others, because sometimes players can't always do that. And that's my role. Sometimes staff can't understand why is Jess feeling so strongly about, in their view, something that might feel so small. But I always start with the destination in mind and work back. So if our destination is to win multiple golds, back-to-back golds in 2 major tournaments, if that's our destination, and then we work back right down to the micro and macro detail every day, I promise you it's because I'm thinking of that. And I have to sit with something and make sure I filter that, because maybe sometimes, it's just preference. And I need to go, no, Jess, that's just your preference. That isn't going to serve the ambition of the team. That's just about me. Okay, well, then let's get rid of that. But I think I've just learned, and I think, courtside, all the coaches that you've interviewed, some brilliant coaches, right? You've interviewed some world leading, far more successful than I have been yet in international roles, Norma and Nolene, huge track records. When you're courtside, you're competing against people who are as knowledgeable, if not more so, or more experienced. So that stuff, you almost have to, it's the same I say to the players, like physically, fitness wise, you're going to be matched and sometimes beaten, so that isn't really where the magic happens. I'm a big believer that in terms of mindset and how you set things up and intuition are a really important edge to have. So I don't think it's something to be dismissive of. I think it's something to be trusted. And if all things are even, if we're all really good coaches, if technically we know our stuff, if tactically we know our team well, if we know the opposition inside out, if all those things are even, then intuition and gut feel is important to listen to, right? Because it might be the one thing that sets us apart from the team on the other end, or in the other colour bib. So I have learned over time to trust my instinct. And I also know that I know myself well enough that it'll always be coming from a place of care about the people. So as much as the output might hurt some people, I know that I'm doing it for the good of the team. And I absolutely feel very clear that my role is to, yes, care about every individual, but it's also to make difficult decisions that keep the team's best interests at the forefront. And, you know, that's a daily thing, isn't it? That's a daily thing. You know, sometimes you care about the individual, but you have to make a decision that's right for the team. And as a result of that, that individual isn't hearing what they want to hear. But that's okay, because I trust my gut. And I also know to be true that this is the right decision for the team. And that's most probably the only way that you can go to bed at night, you know, with a moral compass that feels okay. And I'm a big believer that one of my main drivers when I came into this role was making sure that this team felt like they're winning, but winning deep. And what I mean by that is that sense of fulfillment and joy. So if we're fortunate enough to make it on a podium, you know, I've heard and seen and accounts from athletes in all sports where it's sad, you know, like you hear the stories of what we believe as a fan was the pinnacle of a career. And actually they weren't happy. They didn't feel fulfilled. They had no sense of joy in that moment or in the journey up until that point. And I don't think one has to be instead of the other. I think they can both be achieved. And I think it's really important that we're not trying to win at all costs. I don't think that's right. So it is a really important value to me that people feel joy along the journey to what are pinnacle moments that the world see. But the day, and don't get me wrong, you know, like the day in, day out, we all know, like at this level, it's 90% slog, you know, like for that 10% of feeling brilliant, but you can still enjoy it. You can still enjoy the people around you. You can still enjoy the slog, actually, as long as you feel like you've got that sense of camaraderie and that you feel pride in what you're doing and that you feel that everyone around you believes in your potential and your capability. So yeah, I've learned to trust myself a little bit more because I know myself well enough to know it's coming from a place of really good intent. And, you know, I'm consumed daily by thinking of the needs of others. And so I know that. So I think absolutely intuition and trusting your gut instincts are so important. But it's one part, I guess, of the decision-making process. And it's not everything, but I think when all things are even, it can often be the thing that tips the balance, and more often than not can lead to, you know, success. So to trust in that, I think is really important, and to have no regrets as well. I think it's really important that if you've got to that point, all things are even, you make a call, you know, like you have to trust the process. The outcome might not happen, by the way. So you might have made that decision based on instinct, and then you may not get the desired outcome. Does that mean that your instinct was wrong? No, not necessarily, because there's so many factors at play. So I also think it's important to be kind to yourself and be curious about it if it doesn't get the desired outcome, but not necessarily to be overly hard on yourself, you know, but that maybe just go back and think, was there something missing in my decision-making process? Or, you know, if I was to experience that again, is there anything that I might do slightly differently? Yeah, I guess a long answer.
No, it's fascinating. I think one of the things I've learned from all these interviews is actually to trust my intuition, or put more differently, is to be more aware of the feeling I'm having before I make a decision. And that's probably because in the business world, it's very logical. You know, you tend to go to logic. So I'm trying to tap into that center of myself a little bit more as I roll along through life. But speaking of trust, you did something really interesting this year. And it was actually when I spotted this in the press that I approached Norma to try and get your details. And it was in New Zealand, it was earlier this year, and you stepped back from your role and one of your assistants took over, Liana Liotta.
Yeah.
But you were there. You were still there. And I thought it was a wonderful public expression of your views on empowerment. But I'm wondering, was that easy to actually do?
It was, well, going back to the answer to the last question, really, it was easy for me to arrive at that decision based on a number of factors. So I feel like through my whole journey, I have been fortunate enough to work in an environment where I felt like I've been afforded autonomy and been empowered to take on roles maybe before I'm experienced, before others may think I'm ready. And so I think I've been fortunate enough to be on the receiving end of that. This is a very different time and landscape. So I'm not necessarily saying the two things are the same. But when you say, was it hard? Actually, because my processes and my planning, I'd like to think is so detailed, it was quite easy to get to that decision, actually. And there were a few things at play here. So like much earlier in the year, like January, when we think of, so you go back to logic, when we think about some logic, we knew our journey. We knew we had a World Cup. We've also known what our journey has been like up until that point. It's, for most teams, it's been very challenging. We've done a number of tours over to New Zealand, actually, and been in 14-day, individual quarantine and come out training in a car park and play a 3-match test series. Like the toll the few years leading up to this point has taken on a human level as well as a netball level has been enduring, really, and we wouldn't change it. And I think it served us really well, and we knew that we had to keep playing internationally and play the best teams if we stood any chance of competing with them in this last cycle. But so in January, I knew, knowing also that we had a test series very quickly after the World Cup and back over in New Zealand, that there was some logical and practical challenges and constraints that we had. And we had to make some decisions around our approach in the short term, post World Cup, both on behalf of the players and the staff, actually, but with the longer term in mind. So what's the right decision to make now that we think will protect, preserve, but most importantly, enable us to perform even better when we next come around to a Commonwealth Games and World Cup? So I didn't find that difficult because I've lived it with the team. I've seen the toll that it can and has taken. And for me, that short turnaround between World Cup and getting on and people forget the preparation of a team to make sure that we go to New Zealand in the best possible state we can. And that World Cup group in the main, and we were always going to have some retirements as well, that World Cup group needed rest. Like they needed mental rest, and they needed, to a lesser greater extent for some of them, physical rest, in order that not only to recover from the previous campaign, but also to prepare and revigorate for what we have to come. And it has, everything's coming thick and fast. There's been no real time to kind of sit with the reflections of the summer, really. So those players would have had to have returned immediately from South Africa and gone straight into camp, in order that we were ready physically and tactically and technically to go overseas and give a good account of ourselves. And so there were some practical constraints that felt right to me, that felt like the right thing to do, to protect those people and those players and some staff for the reasons that I've already said. So the actual group that were remaining, that have been selected on our program back in April, that weren't in the World Cup, they were in camps before we even landed back in the UK. They were already in their camps. They needed to physically prepare, then they needed to tactically prepare, and then they needed to get on a long haul flight, and be ready to hit the ground running in Test 1. So that's the reality of the overlap. And that decision for me was easy. I'm not saying other people like it. I'm not saying it's not difficult to navigate and provide that rationale for our organisation and to bring people along that journey so that they understand. But I had full support with that because we do care about our people. But we also have ambition to be better. And so for me, that was kind of, I guess the initial bit that we had to deal with. Now, when it comes to, I'm no different. I've not yet returned from South Africa. The group are already in camp. We've got other staff that are helping to support them. And I guess from my perspective, I needed to make sure that I had some decompression. And it wasn't, even then it's not long, but I needed to make sure that I was in the right frame of mind to be the best servant to that team's needs and prepare them well. But in January, I had already anticipated that the right thing to do is to wrap staff around that group who can remain 100% focused on what they need. And my role is most probably to support that staff team and to be able to take a slight step back so that I could learn about that playing group, so that now when we're heading into a South Africa series and a Nations Cup in January, I have a really sound and rounded view to a lot of players that were very new to our program, who are very young, pretty green in terms of this international landscape. And so to take a bit of a step back actually allowed me to observe the player group in an international environment and under those conditions in a very different way to when I am right close and up against it. And that wasn't me actually shirking responsibility. It was me trusting that Liana's more than capable and very aligned, and has worked closely enough with me and the team for long enough that I can trust that the messages are common. The technical and tactical work is very aligned to the Roses way that we've worked hard at the last couple of years. And she's more than capable as a coach to serve that team for that period of time on the ground in the day-to-day run-ins and preparation. The best thing I can do for that team and that group of players is to get to know them, to understand them, and to set them up for future success. And actually to trust in Liana and to trust that player group. I did go into some of the camps in the UK before they left for New Zealand, and I obviously joined them in New Zealand. And that was always the plan, to be there, but not necessarily to feel the obligation to that I'm the only person who could maybe prepare that team day on day in training sessions. I think the best way to serve that team is doing what we did. And so it wasn't hard. It wasn't hard to trust Liana. That wasn't hard. I trust Liana, I trust Sonia. And I think we're only kind of two and a half years into being a coaching team, but I've felt more than comfortable to do that. My duty was to be there, though. My duty was to be there, to be able to kind of oversee things, even from a staffing point of view, like what's the environment like? Like, am I seeing and hearing things that, we're bringing from the previous cohort? Where might the work need to be done, and where might we need to invest in the months? And since we've been back in camp, so it's been brilliant insight for me. And I'm just, as I say, my ego isn't that big that I feel I have to have hands-on and complete control in that way. I think it's okay actually to find space within a 4-year intense cycle, in particular at the start of one as well. So it's okay and most probably much needed to kind of just see your program and see your player group, as I say, in those match conditions, in a significant test series, which we took very seriously. I mean, if we hadn't, then we wouldn't have got those players back into camp in the way that we did. Like we understood the significance of it, and we respected that competition hugely. And sometimes the placement of these competitions going in and out of COVID hasn't always been at our choosing. It's quite complex, the international calendar, and I haven't really had a 4-year calendar since I came in. So, and I'm sure a lot of other coaches have felt the same. So that's quite unusual. So some of the placement of these things maybe isn't perfect from a timing point of view. And then we have to think about what are both the intended and unintended consequences of that. And then obviously journey with the group and make types of decisions like we've just described. But it was so valuable to think differently about that period of time for us. And I'm now been back in camp for 5-6 weeks, with an incredibly, exciting group of players, some new, some returning from the World Cup. And we're headed now towards our first home series since the summer. And I feel as informed as I could around being close enough to the action, but not feeling like I have to have complete control in the way that I think sometimes we feel we have to be seen to have as a head coach. And maybe that just speaks to my view, as you say, on my role. And don't get me wrong, I don't know if it's something that would happen frequently, because I am responsible. Ultimately the way the team perform is on me and the environment that I help to set up and lead. I'm not shirking from that at all. That isn't what that was actually. It was a very deliberate action, as I say, some constraints led and others where we thought quite intentionally around what's the best way to run this and support this team now, but even more importantly, what will set us up for greater success moving forward. And I'm really proud. I'm really proud of the team. And it's not always just about results, is it? It's about the way in which we carry ourselves, the decisions we make, why we make them, thinking about our people and our performance. And, you know, it maybe wasn't ideal or optimum, but it was the situation we were served. And so we did what we felt was right. And I am incredibly proud. And I think to even get a win against the Silver Ferns with a less experienced side is an encouraging sign for us. You know, match one of the next 4-year cycle, that's not something we've ever done against the world's best. So I'm hopeful and actually quite confident that the return of decisions like that in 3 or 4 years' time, I'm hoping will come back at us 10 times over. That's the intention, right? I've now got a broader base of players who know what it feels like to beat one of the best teams in the world. You know, that is so invaluable. Having spent years with previous underage teams and under 21s, trying to get them to believe in themselves, but they haven't yet seen or got the evidence of that. So they just think I'm a crazy woman who, you know, is telling them that they're brilliant and that they will be better and you can win. And I think that's the joy that I'm having on this journey with the group, is that for themselves, they're starting to provide the evidence that's needed to give them a bit more of a psychological edge against the best teams in the world, who are just so well rehearsed at winning, sustaining winning and repeating winning. And that's just not something we're yet to kind of enjoy, but it's certainly what we're trying to achieve in the next 4 to 8 years.
So Jess, I know you've got to run off to training. I think it might be getting close to 9 a.m. there in the UK. So I am going to ask just one more question if I can. And you talked a little bit about legacy back at the start when you talked about the colour green. So I guess I want to ask, when you think about the word legacy and you peer into the future, whether it is 4 or 8 years, what comes into your mind?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's around, I'd like to think wherever I'm in 4 to 8 years, that the Roses programme and this team have enjoyed the most amount of success ever. And I think to have elevated and helped to transform how this team are seen globally and what they achieve, because I genuinely do believe that we're at a bit of a tipping point of having an opportunity to really try and nudge ourselves in and amongst, you know, the Australia and New Zealand's. The margins are tiny below us as well. So the risk of both winning and losing in that top group is, as we felt the last 2 years, you know, a 4th place and a 2nd in 2 major tournaments. And I think there's more of that to come. But for me, I just hope that I've helped instill some transformational change, both as a system so that the success can be sustained, and actually that we can expect an England team to be in finals as opposed for it to be a nice to have and a bit of a surprise. You know, I think that's where I'd like the mindset to shift, really. So whether I'm in the role or not in the role, whatever job I've ever done, I always like to leave it thinking it's going to live on. And I hope the system would be strong enough and that you've got a pipeline of talent that is able then to sustain and transform how this team is seen around the world.
I think transformational change is a pretty good place for us to finish. So Jess, thank you so much for your time here today. It's been awesome listening to you. I wish you all the best over the next 4-year cycle, and I look forward to seeing those results against Norma.
Thank you for having me and for being so patient and tolerant, listening to my stories.
Thanks, Jess.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. You have been listening to the great coach, Jess Thirlby. I hope you got a lot out of Jess's warm yet intense style and found a few ideas that you can bring back to your own dinner table, locker room, or work table for discussion. When I listened back, some of the key highlights for me were Jess's view that you can experience success and joy, and finding a way to help people enjoy the slog that leads to success is critical. How the desire to build connections across the team drives her actions. How the team's performance is often a mirror of your energy and mindset as the leader. And her views on the power of challenging people to help them learn and grow, and the very deliberate way she goes about building team environments to facilitate this type of communication. I hope you enjoyed it as much as we did. And just before we go, if you have any feedback, then please let us know. Just like GAA Coach Quotes, who on Twitter said, came across this podcast recently, looking forward to listening to some excellent interviews with world-class coaches. Thanks, GAA Coach Quotes. We love the interaction with the people around the world who listen. And so if you have any feedback or comments, please let us know. And if they're positive ones, then please let a couple of other people know as well. All the details on how to connect with us are in the show notes or on our website, thegreatcoachespodcast.com.